So Stormchasers Talent has been a pretty big topic of debate in the Lessons deck since the deck has really popped up. And I'm kind of going to go through my thoughts on whether you should play it or not. Um, I'll start with the argument against it. So probably why people would consider cutting it is they're like, it's not really your game plan is to draw a bunch of cards and win. So you're kind of a control deck. The auto doesn't really like attack or block that well. Like you're trying to win with, accumulate wisdom, just drawing a bunch of cards. You're not really pressuring your opponent's life total with the otter. It's not really blocking. So you could rather use other slots to play cards like more removal like Iroh's Demonstration, more cantrips like Consult the Star Charts, and then some 3 steps ahead to lock your opponent out of the game once you've drawn a bunch of cards. I think that's fair to say those are sort of, the things people would say. That's why you wouldn't play Stormchasers Talent. But here are sort of some of my arguments of why I do like it. So the first thing I would say is I think it's the best goldfish, in the sense of, I guess you can differentiate between the artist talent and non-artist talent version, and I'm only talking about the artist talent versions. If you're not playing artist talent, then yeah, I don't have anything to say. So I'm just talking between the artist talent version. So when you do have artist talent, having a 1 mana card to trigger the rummage is like very good. So not only does Stormchaser Talent give you more 1 mana cards because Stormchaser Talent itself is a 1 mana card, but it also lets you play more Boomerang Basics. And in addition to that, when you Boomerang Basics your own Stormchaser's Talent, that's even more triggers. So it gives you a ton of ways to trigger your Artist Talent. Artist Talent's a slow card. You're paying 2 mana just to rummage, so having more ways to get value out of the rummage is pretty good. But in addition, another aspect of why it's good with goldfishing is it just adds more lessons to your deck. So now your accumulate wisdoms and your grands get stronger because you just got to play more Boomerang Basics. And some people might say, well, if you play Iroh's Demonstration, you can kind of get more lessons to your deck. But the problem with that logic is when you play against a deck that doesn't have creatures, you're going to have to side out your firebending lessons and all those kind of cards. And that's when Boomerang Basics can be really important to pad your lesson count. And especially as it's a cantrapping lesson, it adds a lesson to your graveyard while digging deeper to your payoffs, whatever. So it's good with the cantripping side of the deck. But it goes even deeper than that because this deck has a lot of cantrips, abandon attachments, accumulate wisdom, the artist talent as I'm talking about. And when you're drawing a lot of cards, you see a lot of cards, which means you're good at assembling the combo. So to give an example, let's say you have a turn 1 Stormchaser's Talent, and then your hand has an abandon or an accumulate wisdom on turn 2. You're going to, when you resolve that accumulate wisdom on turn 2, because you played a Stormchaser's Talent on turn 1, now seeing a Boomerang Basics is really strong because it'll be a 1 mana draw 2. And it can literally be a 1 mana draw 2 with Artist Talent because you don't even have to replay the Stormchaser's Talent. If you don't want to, you could rummage it away. So basically, you're very good at assembling the combo, or maybe you keep an opening hand with a Boomerang Basics or 2, and then you accumulate wisdom and you find the Stormchaser's Talent. So you're not just assembling the combo naturally, you have all these cantrips that help you assemble the combo. It's good with the goldfish in that sense, but it even goes beyond that because once you're drawing a lot of cards with your engine, so you have accumulate wisdom and monument to endurance, those are the 2 main ways that you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. You're obviously going to want cheap cards to stabilize the board. So let's say, for example, you have monument to endurance and artist talent in play. Then obviously 1 mana cards are very, very good because they trigger the artist talent and therefore the monument for 1 mana. And you're going to want to trigger the monument ideally 4 times in a turn, because if you trigger it 4 times, that means you can. So when you have artist talent monument, if you trigger it 4 times in a turn, twice on your turn, twice on their turn, that means you got to do the draw card, make a treasure on your turn, draw card, make a treasure on their turn, which is not completely trivial to get. So having 1 mana makes it really easy to get to the being able to trigger the 4 modes, which means monument says draw 2 cards and make 2 treasures, which is very strong, obviously. So basically, once you're storming off and drawing a bunch of cards with monument artist talent, it's good in the sense that it's 1 mana, but it's also good in the sense that it's stabilizing the board, because once you have that going, you're obviously just trying to not die, so just making chump blockers at that point can be quite valuable. In addition, it's the same with accumulate wisdom. If you accumulate wisdom and draw 3 cards, that's really powerful, but obviously you don't just win the game. And once you draw 3 cards, having Boomerang and Stormchasers in your deck to draw into is pretty nice, because you can imagine if you draw 3 cards and you draw a Stormchaser and a Boomerang, those are pretty strong cards to draw. So it's good when you're goldfishing in the sense that when you're drawing a lot of cards, they become potent. having more 1-mana cards, like having more 1-mana bounce to steadily as the board, having more 1-mana card draw on your own effects, or 1-mana draw 2, more ways to like chump block 1-mana card, like etc. So those are kind of the 3 ways it's good with goldfishing. Good with triggering Artist Talent, good at stabilizing the board, and good with your cantrips. Okay, so then another thing that people can mention is resilience. So Stormchasers and Boomerang can be good against a lot of the forms of interaction your opponent play. One of the early examples I remember was I was testing against my friend for Pro Tour Lorwyn, and Spell Snare was just going to come out, and people were talking about, whether it was going to hurt lessons and all that kind of stuff. So he was playing a list with a lot of Spell Snares, and we play a couple of games where it just go Stormchasers Talent Boomerang, and he's passing with Spell Snare, and he just loses the game. That's obviously something Stormchasers Talent can do. It can give you a lot of game against these counter spells, because normally, like, let's say you play a card like Stormchasers Talent's pretty good against counter spells because it's a 1-mana card. So if they pass with counter spells, either they have to use their counter spell on your 1-mana Stormchasers Talent, or if they let it resolve, then you could Boomerang basics, and a lot of the counter spells like Spell Snare, Annul, Spell Pierce are going to have a hard time, because not only does it just evade them, but it's also just a 1-mana card. So even if they do counter it, you only paid 1 mana, and it can clear the way for your other cards. So it kind of presents that tough dilemma for your opponent. But even beyond counter spells, against discard spells like Duress and Deceit, which see a lot of play in Standard, Stormchasers Talent the level 2 mode can be pretty relevant against those cards, but also it just gives you more threat density to make those discard effects easier to ignore. You're not just a linear, just all in on my Monument, but you also have this other Stormchasers Boomerang thing, which is obviously good against discard because it just draws more card. And the same with Disenchants. People might side in a lot of Disenchants, but if your opening hand is like Stormchaser and Boomerang basics, and you're doing that, their Disenchant's going to look pretty bad against that effect. It's the same as Rest in Peace. A lot of people will side in Graveyard Hate, Soul Guide Lantern, Rest in Peace, Keen Eye Curator, and Stormchaser. While it's true they can stop the level mode, but if you just go Stormchaser Boomerang, it can be pretty punishing that they were dirtling around with the Graveyard Hate. And one other thing to talk, it's a mix of resilience and goldfishing, but when you're mulliganing a lot, Stormchaser and Boomerang are great cards to mulligan into, to have them together, because you could have a 5-card hand that's like 2 lands, 2 Boomerangs, and a Stormchaser, and that's just really powerful, obviously, to help you get out of a mulligan and make mulliganing less punishing. And then another thing I would say, probably the last angle I would talk about, is people will say that it's bad versus green, for example, right? People will say, yeah, it's bad versus green, Landfall's one of the most popular decks, or it's bad versus Prowess, you can't really block, you're not really attacking them, and you're going to side them out all out anyway. But the nuance I would add is there's a difference between being bad and being useless in a matchup. And Stormchaser's Talent, while it's not really maybe the ideal card you would want against the green decks, it's not useless, because a lot of game ones are very goldfishy. They don't have really much interaction for your Artist Talent and Monument, and even Wisdom and Gran. So a lot of times you're just trying to buy time to set up your engine, and like having a Stormchaser's Talent blocking their Chocobo can be a really big deal, because if they don't have Trample, it's not that easy for them to get Trample on the Chocobo, and the Stormchaser Talent can do a pretty good job of buying a turn or two so that you have time to use your Monument and stabilize the board. Same with Might Form. Like, they could just have a random guy in play, and as long as it's not a Surak with Trample, the Might Form can just get so many triggers on it, and then you're going to need like extra removal, all this hassle. So the Stormchaser chump blocking is obviously real when, if you play Monument, you can just run away with the game pretty quickly. Like, a pretty common thing that could happen if they have no Disenchants is you go turn 2 Artist Talent, and if you're on the play, you can just turn 3 level it. Turn 4, then you can play Monument, and then you just need to survive because you have the discount already online with the Monument. And yeah, Boomerang basics is not like, the fact that you get to play more 1-drops can be good against green, for a lot of obvious reasons, but also there's just going to be situations where maybe you have 2 Boomerang basics in your hand, or 1 or 2 Boomerang basics in your hand, and then you're like, wow, Stormchaser's Talent's really good here. It doesn't matter the fact that maybe it's not ideal in the matchup, the combination of these cards is just so strong. Sometimes you draw them together and it's just strong. So I would say people like overstate the like it's bad versus green. Like, yeah, you'll side it out, but obviously it's not useless. And similar things against Prowess, where like the chump blocking can come up, bouncing one of those things is not that bad. Again, 1-mana Lesson is just really good in this deck that has such a good late game with Accumulate Wisdom and Monument that it just wants to survive to get there, make sure it has the 3 lessons going. So that's basically covers all of it. I'm just going to take a moment to see if there's anything else I would add here. No, so because of all those reasons, I guess the last thing I would add is if you cut the Stormchaser's Talent, you have to ask, what are the cards I'm cutting it for? And I think a lot of these cards, the problem with these cards is they're not as flexible. Like Iroh's Demonstration, if you're not playing against a deck that has creatures, it's going to be useless, whereas Stormchasers Talent can have utility against any matchup. And that might sound kind of like abstract, but it's not that hard to imagine you play against a control deck, and Stormchasers Talent is such a more useful card than Iroh's Demonstration, and the deck already has a lot of removal, because it's already playing 8 burn spells, 4 firebending, 4 combustion. That's more burn spells than any of the other, blue-red decks are really playing. Consult is like a very slow card. It can cost 2 to 4 mana in a deck where you already have a lot of cards that do nothing to impact the board for a while. Artist Talent, Monument, Abandoned Attachments. You're playing a lot of slow cards already. And 3 Steps Ahead is a card that cancel... Like, it helps you lock up the game once you've already locked it up, but I would say one of the key problems of the deck is tempo, because you play so many cards that don't impact the board. The 3 Steps Ahead is not the best tempo card in the world, because it's a 3 mana cancel. It's not really a card that helps you as tempo. It's more that a card that helps you lock up the game. So if you end up cutting Stormchaser, you're going to kind of have to add these slower cards that don't help you as tempo as much, that might be more narrow, that maybe are less proactive. Standard's really big. There's a lot of different strategies, so it can be hard to be reactive and be a control deck. I mean, there's kind of the meme, now control is not that bad in Standard, but people will say control's not as good anymore because the best cards are threats, so you kind of have to end up cutting Stormchaser's Talent, which is a card that people want banned, that they want like it's arguably one of the best cards in Standard for just interactive kind of controlling card like 3 Steps, Arrows, whatever. So that's kind of my views. That's why I like Stormchaser. I mean, I will say I don't think it's bad to cut it. I think if you feel more comfortable playing more interaction, I think that's fine. I think the arguments make sense that the Lessons deck is controlling. I just think in a sort of a roundabout way, the Stormchaser's Talent helps your control plan by just being a 1 mana card. But I don't think it's bad to cut it. I think it's fine to cut it if you want to, but that's why I've always been playing Stormchaser's Talent myself.